The starter box was what would likely be the beginning of many Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG players' journeys. While you could have attempted to make something out of what had come beforehand, this is not only what brought 50 new cards in what should be a mostly competent deck, but a deck box, a life point calculator, and most importantly, 6 starships. Oh, and a playmat, so if you were playing on the dirty, disgusting floor, the cards would not get dirty at all. Card sleeves, give them a couple of years. But this is not a review of the products or what came in the thing I cannot really get because they're probably super expensive now. This is about the cards, and boy. After the mediocrity of Booster 1, the starter box not only introduces new card types, but some of the most iconic and powerful cards in the game's history. So now let us journey through the 50 cards of the starter box. And we are starting off with a bang with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Monster. That even the most basic bitch Yu-Gi-Oh! Player knows what it is. You know him, you love him, or tolerate him because you're sick and tired of seeing him. The Blue Eyes White Dragon. If Dark Magician was the basis for Protag aces for their attack and defense, the Blue Eyes define the rival aces, being 500 attack points higher and his defense points being the same as the attack of the protagonist monster. I don't think the dragon really needs to be explained, but this legendary monster of max destruction is unmatched with its high power, pulverizing any of its opponents with either White Lightning or Burst Stream of Destruction. And you know, at this point in the game, it really is the best monster. I'm not kidding. Keep in mind, we still have the junior rules as the main rule set for the game, so you can summon a free K attacker for free. No tributes, and it's legitimately a very hard monster to beat. The only way to take it out the field is either to draw with a blue eye of your own, or using any of the spell or trap removals that was introduced in prior sets, or the ones we're going to see in this set. Heck, even after the new rules were implemented and you had to sacrifice 2 monsters to even get the blue eyes, some people still tried to make it work. It was the highest stated monster of the game at this point, and it would arguably more or less become less usable as better tributes for less came out that had decent attack and effects. But trust me, we're gonna see this doofy little guy coming soon. Also, this card art is just, I don't know what to make of it. Dark Magician looked threatening. This just looks meh. So, after the peak of power that we have seen, let's move on to the bottom end of the spectrum with Shadow Spectre, or Hellbound, which I guess is a monkey since it's supposed to be an animal spirit. I think maybe something hound based off the translation of his Japanese name, but yeah, usual suspects, weak attack, weak defense. If we do a list of things Blue Eyes would pulverize in this set, but that would just be everything except 2 cards. Next we have an entirely new card type, from a monster that was not even a fusion when it was originally conceived in the manga. Joey Wheeler's ace monster before Red Eyes Black Dragon, Flame Swordsman. Yeah, I really cannot do the Brooklyn accent. This is our first fusion monsters. These purple cards reside in what is known at the moment as the fusion deck. In order to access the monsters in this deck, players first need to play they need to draw polymerization, or just fusion in Japan. And if they had both specified monsters in hand, or on field, you could just fusion summon these monsters, and they were terrible. They were bad and not good. You see this? You see that attack set? For the starter box, that is the height of fusion attack power. Which, if you think about the junior rules right now, you know, hey, that's an extra monster on the field. That should be fine. Then you remember, oh yeah, fusion / polymerization counts as my 1 spell for the turn. Yeah, that's not worth it. It's such a resource dump. Not only do you need to draw fusion, a very specific card, but you also have to draw very specific monsters at this point. For Flame Swordsman, you have to have the Flame Manipulator and Masaki. Hey, it's not like you just need a pyro and a warrior. It has to be those two specifically, and that's gonna be an issue for a while. Sure, fusions would end up seeing meta play, but early on it was just janky decks or unfair bullshit, and it wasn't through poly. You were cheating this stuff out with cards we'll see later. And this is just a personal pet peeve, but they don't really have any fun text to go alongside them. It's just the ingredients used to make them. Like, you could not tell me they couldn't more or less fit in some additional text for these, like, a warrior imbued with the power of fire. His sword salamander melts all who comes close to him. And, like, that's just something that came off of the top of my head. And yes, this is another thing that's going to become good later, like almost close to 20 years after the fact. But yeah, let's just move on. Behold, the myth, the legend, the skeleton, the skull servant, or white. Quite possibly one of the worst monsters in the early game, with some of the worst stats you can imagine, and if you ever lost your last point to one of these things, yeah, you definitely were the laughing stock. It was a challenge in some games, alongside Sparks, to kill your opponent with this. For the longest time, this was the definitive example of pack filler. Just something kind of the Phillies to say that they have 50 cards, but as you can see by the card text, it's dangerous in bigger numbers, so be careful because it will still be a 300 attack, 200 defense monster if you somehow summon another one. But its mimetic status of being so terrible would end up giving it love. Like, come on, you can't be angry at this thing or disappointed. Look at that face. Look at that attack stack. You want to more or less kill your opponent with this thing. And it would end up giving it its own kind of deck later on we'll talk about. I'm really just saying a lot of things we'll see here. Unfortunately, we have to move away from the absolute greatest monster in the game to just a mountain warrior. This goblin-looking guy that appears to be the forgotten cousin of the lava and swamp guard is strong and stubborn, moving with gusto in the worst places. I'd like to see if he can cross the truly worst place imaginable. A long line full of angry customers tired of waiting. Not really much to say about the basic insect. I mean, I feel like it explains itself. It is a basic insect, in this case a grasshopper, that the Japanese text claims is a swarm of insects that enjoys the heart of the forest. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. What you should use for a measly power up for this thing. It's paltry 500 attack, though I guess place it in defense as it is slightly higher and use the cannon when it comes out. Next up is a card that, if you don't want to count all the large soon-to-be tribute summon monsters, isn't bad. Trial of Nightmare or Hell, if you want to know the difference between them. Nightmare has no blood, so you know it is a nightmare, while Hell has you bleeding in hell. Anyway, this living sword passes judgment on the enemies trapped in the coffin. That would have been an interesting monster for Merrick to have used if he was wanting to inflict actual honest pain. But, 1300 attack, just 100 points below the current soon-to-be normal monster champ count on. This is okay! If you got the theatrical version of the starter box. Yeah, so I lied at the beginning. This is technically 56 cards. Because when the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie released on March 6, 1999, people who came to the premiere could get their hands on early copies of the starter box that would be sold just under 2 weeks at retail on March 18, 1999. But in the theatrical version was 5 exclusive cards that would be replaced by different cards when it came out in card shops and any place carrying the box. And one of those monsters was Kage Ningen. Yeah, that's just kind of deflating. Hey, where'd you get that monster? Oh, I got it in the starter box? Huh. Wasn't in my starter box. Oh, I got mine when I went to see the Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie. So instead of Hell, we have this Shadow Fighter that fights with both physical and shadow forms to attack, which makes him tough. Yeah, it's pretty tough for the standard 800, 600 spread to overcome, so I guess they're right. And next up is another member of the Feeder 5 in 13th grade, or buried. The body from the 13th grade that was never in his grave, wielding a rather rusty blade that I would think would just break after one swing, or who knows, it is one of those rusty blades that just makes a good bashing weapon. People who got the retail version instead got Water for Rock Ogre Grotto number 2, which, okay, this was one of the cards that could be better, with 1400 defense higher than the 13th grade's 1200 attack, though you would think that the text may try to put this defense on display, but no, it's Medusa who turns enemies to stone and smashes them. Keep in mind that attacking a defense position monster, you just lose life points, you don't lose the monster. From the monstrous egg, heated by a Hinotama soul, we get Killer, the Flame Knight. Cherubin. It's Cherubin over here. And yep, so worth it. 3-card combo for a monster that isn't as strong as tributes, the original 1200 trio, or any of the Feeder 5. Like, yes, I get that the monsters involved are not that strong, but you would think a fusion would at least combine the stats or maybe be slightly stronger, but it more feels like it's like it takes the total of the two monsters and then just divides them in half. But we get a pretty cool art for the monster on something you would only summon as a child who didn't know any better, or if you had some kind of jank combo deck during progression where this was potentially something worthwhile. I think the most notable thing about Mystery Hand is that its Japanese text sounds like a play on the Mystery Science Theater 3000 joke about how space is warped and time is bendable. Here it is that space is warped and this arm is extended from between dimensions to attack. Yep, with these hands it shall attack you, and those nails will likely end up broken against some skin. Maybe she really doesn't want to break their nails, they spent hours trying to paint them that ruby red color onto it. The first ingredient for the Flame Swordsman, the Flame Manipulator. Pulling his best Akira pose of his favorite villain, it actually is a more defensive card, it actually talks about it. Putting up a wall of flame or an ocean of flame. Probably more like a puddle, considering the power he has. You'd think looking like Tetsuo would make him one of the stronger monsters, but, nope. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lord of Time. Yep, this little green gremlin is a Time Lord that can do whatever he wants, and his name is Necrolancer. Yep, bouncing between planes is a way to avoid attacks. Monster Egg, the strongest warrior. Yes, it is not a dino or dragon egg, it's a warrior that has somehow concealed itself in an egg. Based off the fact that it fuses into Cherubin, it's clearly what it's meant to be, but it's such an odd choice. Like, is it trying to be, hey, this is what these monsters can combine into with another? Outside of that, don't thank for the common monsters. Jeez, this set has some kind of fascinations for fire monsters as the main fusion type. Anyway, here's Darkfire Dragon, a monster right out of the box you cannot make. Why? Because its materials Petite Dragon and Firegrass are from the first booster, or Volume 1. So better hope you had gotten them from Volume 1 for the second best fusion in the set. Yeah, not even like the best, it is the second best. Oh, you have cards from the very first set? That's nice. Here's a fusion beaten out by Flame Swordsman. I mean, I guess you could say it was Salamandra before the spell came out to make it sort of cool. Remember the Feeder 5, the forgotten rival of Dark Ruler Hades, the Dark King of the Abyss, was once said to rule over the dark. Now he's a 1200 attack, 900 defense beater. Though, considering some of the kings we have seen up to this point, he doesn't actually stand in amongst some of them, and his replacement was yet another king, in this case Fog. Or Smoke, same thing, Fog and Smoke are kind of the same thing. Because the text on the card does bring up Smoke, so why not just keep the original name? Also, you would think since he is smoke, he would basically suffocate you, but he has swords. Electric swords, which doesn't it make the swords kind of worthless if they don't see the swords? And by extension, the large crown too? Anyway, Inferior King at 200 attack. Less. Don't worry, we'll get the more definitive feeder monsters soon. Dark Prisoner, despite being a prisoner and his hands and legs are bound together, is capable of bending light to hide itself from its opponents. Okay, this is better, talking about how it can hide itself for its defense rather than how it uses to defeat its opponents, but is that what was happening in this artwork? Or is he just getting lowered into lava against his will with all those chains? Maybe it's that light thing, but I feel like it would make more sense on a clearer background. Teenage Mutant Monster Turtles, Teenage Mutant Monster Turtles, Teenage Mutant Monster Turtles, protected by a spiky shell, monster disposition. Okay, besides the funny joke and weird singing that I just did, another 1,000 defense monster that is filling the set, which is kind of pointless for junior roles when you have a dragon that has a 2.5k defense. Beware the fatal dance of the masked clown. With sickle in hand, he shall cut you down. Unfortunately, the mask he chose doesn't quite fit on his face, so he can't see very well, so he's kind of just randomly dancing so he can potentially hit someone. Mostly just he hits the wrong guy and ends up squashed beneath him. Fiend Reflection number 2. I'm starting to notice we're getting a lot of these number 2s before the number 1, though I guess these did technically come out after the other one in the TCG. Anyway, this card's actual name is Mirage, which summons fiends from its hand mirror. I guess this is one of the more notable cards, since it actually has both stats that are in the thousands rather than the hundreds, or just one stat in the hundreds and the others in the one stat in the thousands and the others in the hundreds. And 1400 isn't a bad stat, as long as are playing with attributes. So somehow an angel and a sheep somehow make a black cat with eagle wings, and I honestly have no idea what kind of tail that is. Anyway, the fusion is notable for having less stats than one of its fusion parts. You know how they're at least supposed to be, from a stat standpoint, superior to what the two parts they were in? Yeah, Fusionist is weaker than Mystical Sheep number 2. You are fusing it to an inferior monster. You would just be better letting the sheep sit in the field rather than bringing out the cat, which... does that mean the cat is the hunter of the sheep since it's an angel product? Does that mean the petite angel is an angel of death? Key Mace. Another in the super cute and melting the heart of all monsters. Just long enough for him to awaken the sleeping giant Zushin and completely wrecking your day. Besides that, it's another cute mascot plushie rather than being on the field against dragons, magicians, and knights. The second to last member of the Feeder 5 and their counterpart is the Turtle Tiger. Though it isn't an abomination of crossbreeding, it's just a tiger in a turtle shell. Though maybe it is a chimera since it has a scorpion tail. I mean, that does not look like a tiger tail. Tiger tails are basically a long stick. They don't have that, to my knowledge. 15,000 defense, not bad. If you are needing to wall up, and if you don't have the soon-to-be tributes, it was gonna get power prepped in this exact set. And the lesser monster is the, Spike Snail. Devil Snail. You apparently evolved with the power of darkness, so now it's just the shell with spikes or teeth. Because that looks like teeth, there's no eyes, so I'm guessing that it's not the case, so it is all shell. The Hinotama Soul known as Sting. Apparently he has the mask capable of slamming into others despite being fire. Didn't really think that was possible. Well, but there it is. Maybe it was like a bomb, so once it slams into someone, it explodes after that to become a soul. Now we reach the monster of the Feeder 5. The best of the best, and the one that would define Defenders going into the future. Aquamador. Which, I'll be honest, for the longest time I never realized he wore a mask. Thought the eye was a mouth and the eyes were hidden in that hairdo. But enough of me kind of being a stupid kid. Aquamador was the standard of many defenders going forward with a 2K body. If a monster wanted to truly be known as an early defender, then it needs to have a 2K defense. And it can also be used for attacks if you need it. 1200 isn't too bad if you are pushing for lethal, but of course the issue with the monster is, well, you had to go to the movies, or hope someone was selling it in the singles market. Ghidorah wouldn't become readily available to players in Japan until Series 2 in Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragons. Not that one, this one. Long after it would be useful, unless you were wanting to play older rules or sealed, since decks from Series 2 are either really fast or don't care about direct damage. And what did we get in the retailed version? Yep, your Spellcaster Defender went from this to this. Genin, or Juggler, uses his magic tricks to defeat his enemies. And the Japanese text really wants to sell it because not only does it bring out the sleight of hand, but also doves. Granted, this was one of the cards that never saw a physical release in the West, only in the games, but the text probably wasn't as thought out as others. But yeah, it really does feel like if you went for retail, you kinda got screwed. Compared to the feeder, like, every card you got was worse than its counterpart. Obviously, Mador beats Genin, Nightmare beats Kage Negan. Okay, Rock Ogre Grotto does sort of beat out 13th grade, so it has one. It has the one. Dark King is better than Fog King, and Turtle King is the better defender than the Spike Snail, which, yeah, 4 for 1 makes it obvious which was the better deal here. Okay, I know I brought up how underwhelming the new cards that replace the other cards are, but there was something of an advantage if you got it in the retail. If you had pre-ordered it, you would have gotten an exclusive card. The Celtic Warrior, or Elf Swordsman, they probably changed the name so they wouldn't get sued by Nintendo since it was obviously trying to ape Link. But he looks distinct enough not to warrant the lawsuit. Anyway, this elf learns swordsmanship and baffles enemies with his lightning swept attacks. It's basically a slightly inferior Cannon the Swordswoman with 200 less defense. But so if you couldn't go to the events but could pre-order the starter box, it was a decent replacement for the card. Just, don't let the incels learn that the female is better than the male. So after that, we now just have cards we can find in both versions of the set. And our next card, joining Fusionist and being somehow worse than what it needed to fuse, Flame Ghost, which is what happens when Dissolve Rock melts over the Skull Servant. It somehow is 100 defense points less, which just raises the question, why? Why should you do a free card combo for something that is worse than just normal summoning? Why waste the deck space for a card like Fusion? Why take Konami so long to ease up the Fusion requirements by just making generic materials or just fitting in an archetype? And why do our boy Skull Servant so dirty with this crime against him? Next up, we have the Proto Thunder Dragon and Two-Mouth Dark Ruler. A dragon that not only has 2 deadly jaws, but can discharge lightning stored in its horns through its second mouth. So maybe a more apt comparison would be Slifer, but instead of a mediocre effect for a guard card, it's instead just attacks with an okay attack if you're adding to monster under 1,000 attack points. You know, when they were trying to make sure they didn't mention anything like guns, this monster was just one that you could feel people drinking a whole bottle of whiskey. Majin Gun. Devil Gun, if you haven't guessed which things they needed to swap out. A biological weapon that fires projectiles. Man, you know, it really wishes that it was a unit monster that could be equipped by a fiend monster. Instead, it has the misfortune of just being a normal fiend. We have the better Flame Ghost here with Dissolve Rock, born from magma generated by intense heat. Again, another okay monster if you're lacking any of the big monsters. Even if the deck will be weaker, but hey, you get a weird-looking blob monster in your deck. From Flaming Hot Magma, we now move on to the water with Root Water. So, like, is this a monster that exists in the root of plants, or is he just a merman who can call forth tidal waves to drown you? Yep, the King of the Ocean now has competition from this little abomination. Sorry, King of the Sea. That's just how the cookie crumbles. But hey, even if these monsters are nowhere near the big monsters, if you got a singular starter box, you have some decent under 1,000 attack monsters. And that continues over to the next monster. Lunar Queen Elzame, a lovely little creature protected by her lunar-powered curtain. Again, we see more of an attempt to include monsters that has stronger defense over attack. And give a reason to put a monster in defense position, which may be fine if there isn't a monster like the best thing in terms of defense that you can just swing whatever. And yes, it will change in a few months, but this is still a bit of a ways away. Look at what will come out soon in terms of defenders in the next release, which may be fine if there wasn't like Blue Eyes, and yes, it would be requiring tribute soon, but it would get crept in the next set. And hey, if it wasn't for those cards like the Tree of Enlightenment would be actually pretty okay. 1,500 defense would be pretty high. Again, if there wasn't... Yes, yeah, we've gone over this already. Also, how can a tree have such high defense? It claims because of its high intellect it can avoid most incoming attacks, so can it cart itself up enough to not get burned alive or cut at? It's a tree, it's rooted in place. What can it actually do? Well, seeing how apparently now the forest just has high defense for some reason, we have the King of the Forest, or Spirit King of Greenery, or Green Phantom King. All the text talks about is how this card lives amongst the forest. So I guess maybe the monsters don't want to destroy the forest since so many others destroy it. So he's saving his own little kingdom. Ray and Temperature. Child's Play. How about instead the Northern Wind and Sun? These two best buddies onslaught you with Whirlwinds and Heat, which sets the power of a lot of monsters. Yeah, it's amongst the strongest, just not as strong as the Burst Stream Destruction. This next monster does perfectly describe how I feel most days. Sleepy, or just Mystical Sheep 2, shakes its tails at you to hypnotize you with a hypnotic tail. So I guess you would hit yourself with it, but do not give the Dojin artist anything to do with this monster, please. We've gotten some pretty okay monsters, aren't they? Blue Eyes, Cannon, Dark Magician, Silver Fang. So I'm return to Mediocrity with Serpent Marauder, or Devil Snake. So is this a snake that Megalith even got her to eat the Apple of Eden? But enough of potential biblical references that likely were never mentioned in the States, and let's talk about its icy breath. Yes, when you fake snake stuff like Venom, Petrification, if it's a mythical snake with ties to Medusa. But no, we have ice breath that freezes you. Seriously? Why frozen breath and not, being some kind of ice monster?
Change slime. Before we got slimes that could sub out for infusion material, this slime could change to any monster. Unfortunately, he was before effects, so he doesn't have the effect to copy the attack of a monster it attacks or is being attacked by.
And our final monster is material for the first fusion monster. Masaki, the legendary swordsman, or swordmaster, who has fought 100 battles or slain 100 men. Which means it was initially 1,000 attack points, 1,000 defense points, but with each victory it grew to 1,100 in both stats. Wow, just 1 attack point and defense point for a single battle. That is kinda disappointing. Even most strategy games with JRPG stats, at least they give you a little more. And with that, we've gone through every monster that you could have gotten from the starter box. Moving on to the spells, we have yet another new card type. The Field Spell, or Magic. These spells got their own unique zones on the opposite side of your deck and basically act like a continuous spell before continuous spells were for a thing. The starter box all basically had the same field spell, a 200 attack and defense boost for the monster mentioned in the text. Forest for Beast, Insect, Plant, and Beast Warriors. Wasteland or Desert for Dinos, Zombies, and Rocks. Umi or Sea actually would become one of the most iconic and probably best field spells, if attributes really mattered, since this card gave a boost to Fish, Sea Serpent, Thunder, and Aqua monsters, but also lowered the power of Pyro and Machine monsters. And lastly, Yami, which boosts Fiends and Spellcasters while weakening Fairy types. Of these, notably, Umi would get numerous different versions of Umis with other effects. And Yami was probably the best since it could be played with Dark Magician in combo with another card to take out Blue Eyes. But probably wasn't considering since why the 2 cards to take that. Now, a Blue Eyes when you only really needed 1. Raigeki, or Thunderbolt, which, can I just say, why is it always thunder? Yeah, sometimes lightning, but thunder is just the sound that comes from the lightning bolts. But so many games and other medias make the spell always just thunder. My nitpicks regarding more or less people just calling something being Thunderbolt and not Lightning. This was Dark Hole, but only for your opponent. So in this case, it was better than Dark Hole. Rather than potentially sacrificing your whole field, it could be used to clear your opponent like, say, a Blue Eyes and go right in for lethal. It also could help to bring you back from the brink by just drawing it. It'd really make the spells feel more important than any other card. It was a set that could swing the game in your favor or turn it against you. You could call them sort of power spells. Wink wink, nudge nudge. Moving on. Muyan Curry is not an improvement over the previously released Blue Medicine like you would think, considering that Raimei would be power crept by this set's Hinotama. So I guess this is where the Hinotama Soul is born from. Muyan Curry is basically a red medicine that you decide if you want to give to yourself or your opponent. And I don't know why you would. At this point, having more life points is important because if someone runs out of cards in their deck, life points decide the winner. Again, all rule, and there are no monsters that really benefit from your opponent having higher life points than you. And I've already mentioned this enough, but let's catalog it already. Polymerization, another iconic card that fuses 2 monsters together to make nothing particularly good at this point. Kinda just the usual status quo. If something sounded cool or looked cool in manga or anime, it has to be disappointing. Initially, obviously, we would get better fusions, and by extension, fusion cards. But again, we will see just how completely and utterly pointless polymerization is unless it's with certain cards. Our first piece of back row removal. And by the gods, is it awful. Remove Trap removes 1 face-up trap card. At a time where there is only going to be 1 face-up trap card that remains on the field, so it does not negate the trap if it's flipped face-up. Nope, just destroys it, just existing in order to destroy the next card. Which becomes worse since there will be better back row removers soon enough. And now on to the 2 traps to set. The big one was Dragon Capture. It had 1 purpose: stopping Blue Eyes from completely destroying your life points. This would make any dragon stuck in defense position until it was removed from play. And even then, it was probably still something okay to play since the next most powerful boss of good stuff decks was also going to be a dragon, but it was a little easier to overcome since the stats were a lot less than Blue Eyes. But yeah, it may not be Trap Hole, but it was a good emergency card. Kind of like 2-pronged attack. It was a card for when things were not looking good for you. Sacrifice 2 of your monsters for one of your opponents. It's a 2-for-1 that was not in your favor. And really, if you couldn't get the other removal, it was fine. But why wouldn't you want to try to nab 1 more Dark Hole? Unless you were that ahead in tempo and could get away with 2 less monsters. And that was the starter box of both versions. It was a noticeable jump in power. Aside from power spells or the rare monster, you could start from here and not miss much. And while Blue Eyes would reign supreme for a while, this purposely wouldn't last long, as we move into Volume 2 and the changes to the rules.